Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm excited to talk about the next realm of our detox conversation. We covered Detox 101 and Detox 201, where we talked about the physical requirements of detoxification and the nervous system requirements of detoxification. And now we're talking about Detox 301, which is the consciousness requirements for detoxification. And more specifically, the shifts in consciousness that will promote overall health and well-being, including promoting those detoxification pathways, which are so important that we talked about in the last couple of weeks of the podcast here. So yeah, we're going a little bit deeper. And as we go deeper, talking about the multidimensional nature of this human body, mind, human experience, it's inherently difficult to grasp these sorts of philosophical concepts. And I understand that. And that being said, my intention here today is to support you in grasping as best you can and support you in taking the action as best you can in this invisible realm of energy, mind, thought, and consciousness. So I just want to kind of set that stage of my intention and hopefully your intention meeting me there in a place of open-mindedness and in a place of taking action. Because what use is all of this information if it's not inspiring action and change and healing? So that being said, I want to kick things off today with our quote of the day. And this one comes from Dr. Joe Dispenza. Your body is a mirror of your mind. If you want to change your body, you must first change your mind. Now, I think that this quote is a little bit duh. And I'm saying it's a little bit duh because how I understand the body is that it is the mind. The body mind is one complex. It's one entity. So this quote is great because it talks about them as if they're separate and kind of makes it clear that they aren't. Because again, we all probably have some experience of the power of our mind in creating our experience and are creating our health and dis-ease, more specifically. But that being said, despite having these experiences of the power of our mind in creating our experience of health or disease, we don't necessarily consciously regulate and control that power and, step into that power and that authority. So of course, that's, where we're intending to step into as we approach this conversation today. And as we do so, I want to talk about the science that supports this idea of mind, thought, consciousness interwoven with our experience of health. And again, I do think it's important or at least helpful for many to look at this science to really just embolden us with the trust of really what I believe most people already know. Most people already know. When I'm talking about know, I mean like know deep down inside, beyond just knowing conceptually. Most people know that they are powerful beings, but despite knowing that, it's cool to know it on all levels. So there's numerous scientific studies that support us in knowing this, again, with our brain and our body, so that we can step into this reality, into this truth. So I found a few studies that I thought were pretty powerful and supporting me in deepening my understanding of the power of mind and healing. And again, just to set the stage for this, we talked about the physical requirements for detoxification and cleansing liver and whatnot. And we talked about the nervous system and how the state of the autonomic nervous system kind of sets the stage of whether or not our liver and vital organs are going to be functioning optimally or whether they're going to be in a state of stress and survival. But the underlying issue, so to speak, is really where our mindset is, where our thoughts are. And if we are in a kind of stressful thinking state, then of course it goes without saying that our body is going to follow. And that being said, if we step into trust and acceptance and understanding of our body's innate capacity to self-regulate and heal and cleanse and detox, then we are going to be really just embracing our self-healing potential. And this leads us to the first study I wanted to bring up, which is a placebo study looking at non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. And in the study, about 2,700 patients with confirmed non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, which is, fatty liver disease. These people were studied. This is a meta-analysis, so they looked at 43 different clinical trials, and they found that 11.65% of those 2,700 patients experience resolution of liver inflammation, complete resolution of non-alcoholic steatohepatitis without any drugs or intervention of any sort. So just kind of the self-healing body, visualized or measured, if you will. And that being said, like we know that the body heals itself, but so often we are told that disease just progresses. So these people experience healing despite being told that this is the nature of their disease. And in addition, this study found that 18.82% had improvement in liver fibrosis, also through no intervention at all. So 11.65% had complete resolution of liver inflammation, which is kind of the tier before fibrosis, and 18.82% had improvement, not complete resolution, but improvement of fibrosis. And again, we're generally told that fibrosis is non-reversible largely, that this is just the disease progression. So these people had resolution or improvement of non-alcoholic steatohepatitis without any sort of intervention. Not even and just preface this, I'm not talking about just not any pharmaceutical intervention, but also not any lifestyle intervention. Because we know, at least people who tune into this sort of stuff know that these sort of conditions are reversible with diet and lifestyle. Yeah. But what I'm articulating here, hopefully not that well, but if what I'm trying to articulate here is that these conditions are also reversible with nothing at all, with no intervention at all, nutritional, supplement, or pharmaceutical. So pretty cool. Another study that helps to paint the picture of what's going on here with regard to mind, thought, consciousness, and our experience of health. This one is done by Dr. Ellen Langer, who's a great researcher and writer in this realm. And one of her most famous studies was the counterclockwise study that she did in 1979. And in this study, elderly men were placed into, this is 1979. So they were placed into a retreat center or a retreat environment of sorts that created the context as if they were in the 1950s, like 20 or so years earlier. And so these elderly men, I forget the age range, but they were elderly. They were put in this context as if they were 20 years younger, and they were treated as if they were 20 years younger. They were exposed to media and news and stories as if it were 20 years prior. And in living in this environment that was manufactured for them, they also improved all sorts of biomarkers, as well as hearing and vision and strength and mobility and flexibility and postures. And like I said, the physiologic biomarkers that are generally associated with aging, they reverse these sort of things. So one could conclude from this study that the most powerful and maybe also the easiest anti-aging tactic is simply to shift your environment. And this becomes completely self-evident to me as I, live in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, and people are naturally physically active. And I tell you what, like there are many people who just live as if they are younger, and they look younger and they appear younger. And I remember it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, but I ran into a guy, not physically, but, crossed paths with a guy on his mountain bike, and he was, I think, 85, and he was just starting to ride an e-bike. I don't ride an e-bike, and I'm not a huge fan of e-bikes, but except for maybe 85-year-olds. And he was talking about, oh, this is my first ride on my e-bike, and I feel like, I don't want to get, I'm like, anyways, I was like, man, if anyone deserves to ride an e-bike, it's you, mister. So good on you. And so anyways, the context of our life creates our experience. And this leads us to look at another study that kind of paints the picture of how powerful our perception is in creating health or disease. This is a study by Alia Crum, another great researcher in this realm. And this is a study looking at housekeepers, people who clean, like cleaning maids, if you will. And the study looked at 84 housekeepers, and they were separated into two groups. And one group of housekeepers, half of the housekeepers, were told that their daily movement was sufficient and met the Surgeon General's recommendation for physical activity. So if you think about it, like housekeepers probably on their feet all day, cleaning, bending over, lifting things, they're probably pretty physically active, much more so than, a standard ordinary person sitting at a desk, right? So these people were told like, hey, you're really physically active. You're doing enough to stay fit and healthy. And the other group was just simply not told that, not given that context or education around their physical activity. And they were just, sent off to their normal work routines. And they found that after just 4 weeks, given the kind of framing of their physical activity being healthy, the people who were educated around their physical activity and told that they were engaged with enough physical activity to keep them fit and healthy, they experienced a reduction of weight, a reduction of BMI, a reduction of waist to hip ratio, and also a reduction in blood pressure. So all metrics of health in essence, and all metrics also of metabolic health and health related to physical activity, which, again, like if you could encapsulate this, if you could encapsulate a shift in perception, if you can encapsulate a shift in understanding, and if you could encapsulate trust in your body's self-healing capacity, man, that really is the most powerful drug that has all of the positive benefits and literally zero side effects. So just a few studies that really help us to appreciate the magnitude by which our minds, thoughts, beliefs, consciousness shape our experience of health and disease, right? So shifting gears now, I want to talk about today's lesson of the day, which kind of builds on this idea of our circumstances and environment and perception and thoughts creating our reality. And the lesson of the day is, I was introduced to this idea, and I have to admit that I kind of just shrugged it off, and I was like, oh, this is kind of silly. But the lesson of the day, as silly as it might sound, is that you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And just think about that. Like, like, how can that be? Like, how can we become the sum of the 5 people? And that's, of course, this is not literally, but the point here is that we are heavily influenced consciously and subconsciously by our environment and by the people and by the attitudes and by the mindsets that we are exposed with. And of course, I think that the most powerful example of this is being a parent and raising children, and your nature and nurture. And obviously, like, nature is a thing, and the child's genetics and expression and kind of their personality is somewhat hardwired, you could argue. But much more powerful is the circumstances and environment in which the young person evolves and grows, and they take on the habits, they take on the thoughts and the beliefs and the understanding of reality that they are exposed to, that they are looking at, and that you as a parent or me as a parent is modeling. So of course, this understanding really kind of makes me feel like I want to live in alignment and integrity and be that good model. But also it makes me very conscientious of who I, as an adult, as a parent, am exposing myself to, and what I am exposing my consciousness to. And of course, I really don't like the thought or the idea of just like, oh, anyone who's quote unquote negative, like just cut those people out of your life. But you have to understand and be conscious of the influence that those people might have on you so that you can develop those kind of, natural boundaries, so that you're not taking on that quote unquote negativity, which frankly, I don't believe. I don't, we're in control of our energy, our mood, our attitude. We're in control of that. So I'm not suggesting that we have the possibility of outsourcing that. But the point is that our mindset can be influenced by who we're around. If we're around people who are gossiping and, negative about the world and worldviews, like we naturally take that on. And this also goes to like, if for those who maybe aren't super social and active and involved in your community, what are you listening to on the news? What kind of podcasts are you listening to? What are you exposed with? Again, who are those 5 people or 5 voices or 5 energies that you're exposed to? That influences our mental state, our mind, our thoughts, if you will. And also I think much more so physically, when we're exposed to people physically, our nervous system is entrained by those people around us. Our biofield, I like to think of our biofield kind of like this tuning fork, and we have the power and capacity to tune other people into our frequency and our resonance. And I believe that people who are in a quote unquote higher resonance, higher frequency, one of truth, integrity, love, compassion, gratitude, that's a strong frequency. And we have the capacity to overtake and entrain people who are in a quote unquote lower state. But that being said, if we're not as conscious and connected with the integrity of our biofield, then we might otherwise get subjected to the quote unquote lower vibes that we may be exposed to. Or if we're the only quote unquote high vibe person in our world, in our community, then that's a lot of effort or energy to maintain that in the face of, again, quote unquote negativity. So there's the nervous system entrainment, and then there's just the language and identity, and kind of back to that mindset, things like, I think, and I pay really close attention to this in my work as, in the realm of health. If we're exposed to people who are always talking about, oh, I'm so tired, oh, I'm sick of this, oh, that complaining victimhood mindset really is infectious. And we need to be mindful not to take that on. That's our responsibility as a conscious, aware human being, is to kind of be mindful and intentional of the 5 people that you're choosing to spend your time with. And that being said, rather than subjecting yourself and being the quote unquote, oh, that person is a negative influence on me, my intention is to, do my best to avoid any of the quote unquote negative influences. And in so doing, also be the positive influence that is going to raise the vibe, if you will, without judgment, without too much judgment, with just like purity of intention, and just like maintaining clarity and mental health and good intentions. So let's talk about this consciousness cleanse stuff. Let's talk about what I actually mean when we're talking about cleansing consciousness. Again, back to more of the, action-oriented physical things we can do, if you will, even though what we're talking about is metaphysical. We can boost liver detox, and we can cleanse our colon, and we can do all of the things that we can do. But just think about it. If you are eating all the right foods and drinking all the right beverages and doing all the right stuff, and you are still feeding yourself a narrative of, I'm broken, my body sucks, my energy is low, I'm sick, I need something outside of myself. If you keep on maintaining that level of consciousness, that level of thinking, those limiting beliefs, then it really doesn't matter what you do physically. It's going to be an uphill battle. I'm not suggesting that what you're doing physically doesn't matter at all. But what you're doing physically is not carrying the weight that it otherwise would if we were cleansing our consciousness and living in alignment with our true, innate, self-healing, empowered self. So the thing to know here is that the thoughts that I shared some examples of, I'm broken, my body can't heal, I'm too far gone, I'm just someone who always struggle, like just these thoughts that you have, that you may or may not have, or you have to some degree. These thoughts are literally shaping your biochemistry, your biology, via the brain body connection and the immunological connections that are interwoven with the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, all that stuff that we kind of talked about last week in episode 403, Detox 201. All that stuff, really what sets the stage and foundation for how our nervous system is operating, is the nature of our consciousness, the nature of our beliefs, and the nature of our thoughts, and the self-dialogue and narrative that we have with ourselves. And this programming, runs deep. And it's set in motion, I think, when we're born, with our upbringing. So the first step of this consciousness cleanse is just like stepping into this reality of your thoughts and beliefs shaping your chemistry. And in so doing, naturally kind of loosening up these thoughts and beliefs, and allowing yourself to shift from identifying with these thoughts and beliefs, or limiting thoughts and beliefs, to just identifying with your true nature, which is the unwavering presence through which these thoughts and beliefs flow and are experienced. So I think that there might be a tendency to just positive thoughts, positive psychology, which is maybe a fine intention, but in reality, that's kind of just symptom management. Rather than just thinking good thoughts and feeling good feelings, the thoughts and feelings, what's more powerful is understanding the nature through which they flow and the nature through which they are. Again, the nature of this conversation is inherently difficult to grasp, but hopefully you're feeling into this. So now let's talk about what that process looks like for updating your operating system, I like to say. I like to think about your brain and body, mind-body system program, as kind of being like a computer, even though you're a much more beautiful, intelligent computer than any computer that could ever be existed. But that being said, there's like hardware and software, right? And it's super important to know that your hardware is exquisitely, perfectly beautiful, whole, and complete. Your body is intelligent. You have the perfect framework that's plugged in with nature and evolving to support you, and always dynamic and responsive. Your body is incredibly perfect. And it's so important to recognize that hardware aspect of yourself is dialed in, and you're born that way, and you need not do anything except for just, tune in with your natural rhythms of nutrition and hydration and movement and rest. And, those things are helpful for maintaining the functionality of your hardware. But there's also the software component through which your hardware operates, right? So let's face it, a lot of people are operating with Windows 95 or whatever it might be. That's the earliest operating system that I remember, right? And it's interesting how I feel like it's every month or two, the iPhone gives you like this new software update, and it's incredible to think that software updates are like so easy and so simple, and you just push a button and your software updates, and like you have this entirely new experience on your otherwise like old phone that you've had for 4 or 5 years. But the question is, like, building upon this metaphor, what is the nature of your software updating with regard to your body, mind, multidimensional being that you are? Are you allowing your software to update to the current operating specifications that allow you to thrive in today's world? Or are you running with the old programs that are keeping you limited, keeping you in this limited, sluggish experience with all sorts of bugs or quote unquote viruses or whatever like that? I'm not talking about the physical viruses, but I'm talking about, those software viruses and the things that, things get buggy and bogged down. So how can we update our operating system, update our software to support us in maintaining healthy hardware operation of our body-mind system? There's three things that I think are important to consider in this process of software update of this consciousness cleanse conversation. And the first one is, like I already said, bringing awareness to what those programs are, being mindful of the nature of your thoughts and your feelings. And I like to think that the feelings that we have, whether they're feelings of anxiousness or stress or feelings of elation or happiness or gratitude, those feelings point us to understand where our state of mind is. I know that some people might argue with this or not fully understand or jibe with this understanding, but our feelings are our thoughts realized. We feel our thoughts, and I think that this is an oversimplification, but in essence, like our feeling state is a little bit of a barometer as to where our state of our mind is. So as we bring more awareness to how we're feeling, then that helps us to understand the level or at least direction or quality of our thinking. And we can do this without too much judgment or criticism. We can just be detached, aware, neutral, observing our feeling, mental, and emotional state. And I think it's so common. It's so common to detach from our mental, emotional state because innocently we just want to feel good. So if we're not feeling good, then we distract ourselves and we numb out with, food, social media, other forms of addiction or distraction. And that's totally natural. And I don't want to inflict any sort of shame or judgment. And I don't want you to either. I just want you to bring a new level of awareness into your current state. So awareness is key. And from that, I'm kind of alluding to the next level is bringing compassion. Compassion is so key because oftentimes awareness is followed with self-criticism and judgment. And that just kind of reinforces this like habitual reflex to like retract and go back to the status quo. But if we bring compassion, and really like what I mean here is unconditional self-compassion, letting yourself be totally okay with how you are, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, just totally neutrally loving and compassionate, unconditionally is key. Then that kind of sets the stage for everything to loosen. And then we can start to consider laying the framework for new stuff, new feelings, new experiences. So awareness and then compassion. And then once we have that clarity that's created, then I think it's super helpful and important to be exposure to new ways of operating, new ways of thinking, new ways of being. And essentially what we're doing here is we are, quote unquote, breaking a bad habit, which fundamentally, I don't even know if it's possible to break bad habits. I've been told, and what resonates more is that we simply create new habits that replace bad habits. So we can also think about this operating system and the programmed thoughts and beliefs as being bad habits. They're habitual thoughts and beliefs that we're just reflexively thinking and feeling and believing. We're on autopilot, subconscious most of the time. I think studies suggest we're, 90% or so, everything is just subconscious autopilot because we can't be conscious of everything. That would just burn too much bandwidth. But that being said, we can be conscious more and we can be exposed more to the things that are going to bring us into the way of being, the way of thinking, the way of feeling that we want to, that is going to support us again in upgrading, up leveling our operating system to be consistent and, on par with where we want to be in our life and what we want to experience, so that we're not just defaulting to the old status quo operating system that's been running for the previous 2, 3, 4, 5 decades or whatever it is. So awareness, compassion, and exposure. And I think the difficult thing, I don't know what it is for you, but I think the difficult thing for me is really the exposure. Because again, going back to that lesson of the day, is you are the sum of the 5 people that you're spending the most of your time around. Really what that means is you're going to have to spend your time around, not necessarily change your social circle. However, that can be super empowering to, be exposed to people who you want to be on that level with, not again, without judgment. But also, being exposed to conversations. And I always bring up like media and podcasts, and we just really need to cleanse and clear anything that is bringing us down, so to speak, and reinforcing the old quote unquote negative thoughts, patterns, beliefs that we're trying to escape from. And it's challenging because just like most habits, it's kind of addicting, and we're so used to and feel so comfortable with what we're used to and what we're comfortable with. So it's hard to break free, even though I'm sure if you're anything like me, you really want to break free. But despite wanting it so badly, it's so much easier and comfortable to not. So there is some inner conflict that comes as we're talking about cleansing consciousness, upgrading software. What it also comes down to is just being incredibly present and honest with yourself and giving yourself grace, compassion. So awareness, compassion, exposure, balancing all that stuff to support you in upgrading your operating system is key. So wrapping up today's conversation, I wanted to share a little challenge, and this kind of reflects the nature of what we're talking about here. This challenge, which is something that I've done for days on end. I think I did a month of this challenge, but I'm challenging you to just do a day of no negativity. And I'm going to articulate more what I mean. No negativity. And of course, you can have negative thoughts, have negative feelings. It's impossible not to. And negative thoughts and negative feelings are not bad. They're not bad. However, negative actions, negative words, those are optional. We don't need to. So anyways, the challenge is to not act on your negative thoughts and feelings. When you have negative thoughts and feelings, just let yourself have negative thoughts and feelings. Don't say anything about it. Don't do anything about it. Don't respond to it. Just let those negative thoughts and feelings go. Let them be. And what you might find is that they pass pretty quick. And so what this means practically, no complaining, no gossip, no whining, no yelling, no conflict. In essence, if you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all. And this is really hard. I'm at this point kind of an expert of not being good at this. But like I said, I've also challenged myself to this and have had great success for days on end. And really what this is doing, or inviting you to do, is strengthen the muscle of presence. Strengthen the muscle of presence so that you can just be and allow all of that negativity to just flow through and not judge it. Because as I'm sure we'll get into in future episodes, the nature my understanding of the nature of mind, thought, and consciousness is that our thoughts and feelings it's just energy. And it's only when we start to grasp onto it and judge it and build stories with it that it feels negative and something bad. But the fact of the matter is that thoughts and feelings, they're just energy. And we don't need to do anything with that energy. We don't need to make it mean anything, build any stories or identity with it. All right. So on that note, I do want to close things out by inviting you into the final Alter Health Cleanse. This final cleanse is going to be exploring the nature of cleansing consciousness in the context of a physiologic nutritional cleanse as well. And if you would like to learn more, you can head on over to www.alter.health/cleanse. We've done 22 of these cleanses in the past. This one's new and different because we are weaving in this consciousness component. But this is our final cleanse because I've already talked a little bit in episodes how things are shifting out of Alter Health. And this is sort of a celebratory send-off to the old Alter Health and welcoming in the new Alter Health that I'm super excited to be stepping into. So would love to see you in that final Alter Health cleanse starting a week from today. Holy cow, a week from Friday. That's April 25th. And it's just $49. Usually it's $99. Now it's just $49. So head on over to alterhealth/cleanse. And also participants get a $20 coupon for Green Force, which is our lovely sponsor of this podcast, our product that I am so proud of and take every day for my health. And it's a great cleanse enhancer. So you get yourself Green Force as well for $20 off, and you get to enjoy that and enjoy the good reset that this spring season invites as we cleanse together in this final Alter Health Spring Cleanse. So that's enough about that. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week in a whole new episode on the podcast. But until then, keep thriving. Peace and love.